celebrated as they had not done since the time of Joshua. It's like 500 years before. Clearly, the impact of reading their own history made an impression on them. Nehemiah number 8, the chapter 8, is one of the last books of the Torah that gives us an idea of how impactful it was for the people hearing the reading. It's not hard to see how the people at the sea would have wanted, hearing the reading of the song at the sea, would have wanted to connect it with the birds and their own remembered experience of their people. How the birds sang each spring in the wilderness. This reading of Torah was the beginning of a transformation from a temple-based religion to a narrative and text-based religion that took many hundreds of years. Maybe it's time for a new midrash about the birds finding buried treasure, but this time buried letters. And the letters maybe coming together and forming the song at the sea. Anyway, Rabbi Friedman, otherwise known as the Riff, will not be, you won't find it online just yet. I sense when the rabbis suggest, though, it was a popular custom, they had some difficulty and uneasiness with the custom. What better way to sanction it than to link it with a specific reading from the Torah and with a popular midrash as well? Despite this, the rabbis kept recording dozens of midrashim. You have about 6 on your sheet, but they kept my able research assistant, Joel Kurtz. Joel Kurtz, yeah. He's here. He has them all in his... but they continued for 1,500 years into the 16th, 17th century. I believe they were concerned about this folk custom, that it might imply some worship of the birds themselves. Worship of birds was widespread in the ancient world. Ancient Egypt expressed their death and rebirth with their godlike phoenix rising from the ashes. In the Greco-Roman world, bird flight, bird song, and even the entrails of birds sacrificed by the priests augured the future. Later, in the Middle Ages, and even later, birds figured prominently in Christian iconography, illuminated manuscripts, and paintings. Momentous events, and not so momentous, in the birth, life, of Jesus and the apostles were always accompanied by doves. I don't think the rabbis had cause to worry, at least not about worshiping birds. Although the people associated their 40-year journey through the wilderness with the birds, they knew the difference between poetic imagination and worship. God himself had introduced them to poetic imagery at the bottom of Mount Sinai that we read earlier. I will carry you on wings of eagles and bring you near to me. As you can see in the handout under law, near the bottom, the debate continues. The law is quite clear that only domesticated animals are to be fed on the Sabbath. But it may depend on your rabbi. I think you can, for the sake of heaven, it is permitted, according to one rabbi. But maybe he realized the people would probably do it anyway. There are such things are known to happen. So is there a way around the prohibition? There's something called Hidur Shabbat. What is that? That means, embellishment. Beautify the Sabbath. And what better way to beautify the Sabbath than to clean off all the breadcrumbs and all the other crumbs and morsels of bread onto a napkin and throw it outside. Okay, so where there's a will, there's a way. Or as one rabbi said, where there's a will, there's relatives. Sorry. Well, now we come to the hard part. There was a recent discussion of this very custom of feeding the birds on Shabbat Shirah by Rabbi David Golinkin, a halachic scholar in Israel, and many other academics weighed in. One of them did actually mention my original article that you have a copy of, the, what's it called? Shabbat Shirah, the Song Takes Wing. It appeared in Jewish Ideas Daily. But he commented on it only to trash it. It's not academic, it's not properly researched. The best that can be said, he didn't mention my name. My research assistant, Joel Kurtz, was very gentle in bringing this news to my attention. But actually reading through the discussion of all these great sages and commentators, academics, they seem to have little better to offer on the origin of the custom. In thinking of the historical origins of the custom, I'm reminded of some very heated discussions at our Seder table. No, not over Elijah's cup and asking God to pour his wrath on the non-believers. That's an easy one for some, for me. The very issue of the history versus narrative and myth. History versus story. Remember when the story began on the mountains of Eilat? My question was, if there was an exodus through the wilderness of Sinai, surely they would have witnessed this wonderful sight. Whether we find or do not find archaeological evidence for an exodus of 600 or 600,000 Israelites, the impact and centrality of the Exodus story as our national and religious narrative will not change. Regarding the bird migration, I certainly doubt we will find pottery in the desert dating 3,000 years ago with flocks of eagles on it. Maybe our custom of feeding birds is part of our cultural memory and national narrative. It's a rather ambiguous answer, isn't it? So to deal with this uncertainty, when I first presented this, it was just before at Limud, just before Pesach, before Passover. And some words from the Haggadah and Midrash came to me that I think resonated for my difficulty in having the final answer. In Hebrew, Kol marbe lesaper b'yetziat Mitzrayim ke'ilu hu yatsa miMitzrayim. The more one tells and expands on the Exodus story, it's as if he or she himself experiences the going out from Egypt. Exploring this part of the Exodus story and the bird story has brought me closer to our people's national and religious narrative. I do hope it's done that for you. My intention was to finish here, but in November, last year, 2019, I visited the Hula to see the, keep going, yeah. Here we are, the Hula. This is to see the tens of thousands of Eurasian cranes gathered in the fields. At dusk, next slide, they all take off. You can go out in the middle of the birds, because birds are afraid of people, but not vehicles. They found this out, because actually I did the same tour maybe 20 years ago, and then we were in a covered, camouflaged vehicle with bamboo, and we were all huddled inside. And now it's like a little amphitheater. You got 40 or 50 people drawn out into the middle of these birds. Yeah. Actually, okay, they're not afraid of us. And yes. And as we were riding back to the Harper Reception Center, vitally needed actually, although maybe didn't have to be so much concrete. So we listened to a song that maybe answered some of the questions that I've raised here. Well, I'm not sure if it's answered them, but at least it tells us who has the answers. You may want to join us in the words, and I think, is Lior here? Yeah, Hine. One of the Shin Shinim from Israel has a sweet singing voice. And when I rode back in my wagon, they played this song, and everybody knew it. I had never heard it before. So we'll have the words actually in both English and Hebrew, and Lior will help us with the song. Lior is visiting for the year from Beit Shemesh. I think the older part of Beit Shemesh, not the very religious part of Beit Shemesh, but Beit Shemesh is a back road that goes into the Judean hills, which is a very special way to go to Jerusalem and see the city. Anyway, Lior, Bavakasha.
אשר עפות מעל הים, אילו ציפורים היו דוברות כבני אדם, אלו סיפורים היו ודאי לציפורים על הארצות אשר מעבר להרים. כל חופי הפלג, כל אדמי התכלת, כל היחסים המושלגים, כל ימי הפרח שחלפו בדרך, כל השבתות והחגים. אילו ציפורים אשר עפות מעל הים, אילו ציפורים היו דוברות כבני אדם, אלו סיפורים היו ודאי לציפורים. איזה קרנבל היה לכל השוררים, כל חשקת השר, כל חלקת הקיץ בלבבות, אשר אוספת לצבעי שלכת של האהבות הנכזבות. שחלפו בדרך, כל השבתות והחגים. אך הציפורים נאמנות לשתיקתה, וליבו הסתיו הן ממריאות במחי כנף, והסודות איתן.
Wow. Lior has to rush off to a meeting down at the JCC, but very much thank her for her participation. Almost as much emotion as when I heard it for the first time. Anyway, now we'll have Q&A, A&Q, Q&A, which is, what's your heart's content? Anyway, Bernie?
What's interesting here, when I'm looking at that,
You want to say it out loud or stand up even. Make sure you hear.
stand up,
Yeah.
when I look at your map, it looks like the migration route doesn't really go through most of Egypt.
Right.
It only goes through a small part of it.
Correct.
So seemingly, if you believe that the Exodus took that route, they were all thinking, even the birds are leaving.
Yeah. I never heard Pharaoh complain about that. It was his slave labor he missed.
Are
Murray?
there any birds who considered Israeli birds who fly north in the summer or south in the winter?
There may be somebody from the SPNI that knows the answer to that. You mean native that...
I don't
Yeah,
think
like
that-
do Israeli birds migrate?
I don't think there are any endemic Israeli birds.
No, there are nesting birds in Israel, but...
Endemic means they only live in Israel.
Right.
So I
There's
don't
some
think
that
there are-
live and stay in Israel, I think.
But there could be other places as well.
Yeah. Okay, you ask tough questions. Allison, speak up, Allison.
You're going to tell us something about the Israeli national bird.
Oh, yes. Next slide. I'm ready for everything. This is the national bird, the hoopoe. Okay, it was chosen, it wasn't everybody's first choice. As you saw from the other picture, it's a rather weird looking chicken. The two other birds in the running was, you want to go to the next slide? All right, this is, it's called a bulbul. It's like a robin, really friendly, lovely bird, all over the country, eats fruit. And, but it had one problem. I'm sure any Israeli here can tell you. Its name. A bulbul. Nobody knows. Penis in Arabic. So the optics, just wouldn't look good on a stamp. Now the next bird. This is a sunbird, beautiful like our hummingbird. Very iridescent, blue, green, purple, but it suffered by politics. Its name, a Palestine sunbird. So they couldn't name it that. Okay, I just want to carry on with this story. Go to the next slide. This is the Jerusalem Bird Observatory, where I met a man who was in love with the Palestine sunbird. Anyway, these are a class of kids. Next slide. They're banding birds. They catch them in a net and they call it ringing. They put a ring on their leg so that if anybody else finds them, they know where they've come from, where they've been, etc., etc. Okay, next slide. Okay. Who's this guy? Anybody know his outfit? Morris, where are you? You
On the left?
the one on the left, you know.
Looks like I'm Bubba Fett.
No.
He's from the Magic Carpet.
He's from the Magic Carpet. No. He's from Toldot Aharon. They're a sect in the middle of Mea Shearim. This guy, he was coming here every Friday. And I had the binoculars, he had the book. I had a bit of Yiddish, he had a bit of Hebrew, and we bird watched. And I had the courage, not the courage, Yosef was his name. And I said to him, "What, do you study, Yosef? Are you studying in a yeshiva or something?" He says, "No, I study, but I do some IT. So then I said, Yosef, he's about 20, 25 years old. And I said, Yosef, what does your father think about your bird watching and coming here to see the bird? He said, well, I fell in love with the Palestine sunbird. That's what brought me here. My father isn't worried so much about the birds. He's worried about the computers. His birds, I kid you not. So, I don't know if he still comes. I heard not, but... That's a short-toed eagle. Just a spectacular image. Okay, next slide, next question. Yeah, Mendel.
Right. You had a photo of the vehicle in the Hula Valley with all the birds there. What time of day was that taken?
That wasn't my vehicle. If you do go, it looks like late afternoon or something. But if you do go, the best time, if you can get on the last trip at near dusk, when all the birds take off at once. It's quite spectacular. Anyway, next. Yeah, Morris.
I was wondering that the translation of the Hebrew varieties of birds.
Right.
You know, I remember hearing a speech by the zoo rabbi, his name is Rabbi Slifkin.
Oh, I've heard of him, yeah.
And he said that it was very Eurocentric, you know, and Rushy and others use birds that they were familiar with and aren't necessarily the actual species. I don't know, do you have any comments on that?
I don't know. Maybe I was expanding a bit with my King James and Kindle. Although I don't think the hoopoe exists in Europe.
It's called the European.
Oh,
There's
it,
an Asian hoopoe and a European.
okay. So yeah, I suspect they talked about what they knew, you know, but they seemed to be close to what you know.
I think when he said Kanfena Sharim, like he said that is definitely a vulture, not a eagle.
The which the
Kanfena Nesher.
The Nesher is a vulture. Yeah, there's a big debate, but you know, it doesn't make for a good story. You can't sing about on the wings of a vulture, you know, because there is I think a hymn and a popular song that's taken similar quote from Isaiah. Anybody else? Yes, Tamar.
Where do all the parrots come from and the parrots?
Oh.
In the trees that become used?
They're a new, yeah, you see these giant green and blue parrots all over, particularly all over Tel Aviv. They're displacing the other birds. I think they were captive birds. They were, you know, in cages, and people let them go. And we don't realize sometimes what happens with our carelessness. So they're pretty, but they're squawky. Yes.
Answer the question.
Uh-oh.
Why they got their names? The hoopoe got its name because of the chord it makes.
Hoopoe, okay. Ah, okay. But why Dufanit? Why the Hebrew name? That's the name.
Maybe it changes when it gets to Israel.
It does a priestly blessing in Dufan. Anybody else? Oh, nobody's going to ask me about the Yemenite migration. Well, they hesitated here, but then a wonderful story. And it's not a story, actually. When the Yemenite migration, they were exiled at the time the Jews went to Babylon. Some went to Yemen. When Ezra came back, he invited them to come back. And the Yemenites refused. They knew it wasn't so welcoming. And Ezra threatened them with excommunication if they didn't come back, but they still refused. And to this day, Yemenites never named their sons Ezra. Check it out. Okay, tomorrow, one or two more questions, and then somebody has volunteered to thank me.
Jerry, it's not a question, but I'm from Canadian Society for the Protection of Nature in Israel.
Speak up.
I say I'm from the Society for the Protection of Nature in Israel. First of all, I just want to thank you, Jerry, for saying wonderful things about the organization, but also showing us what we have there. And you're correct, we didn't come here to collect money tonight, but what we did do is to invite all of you, when you come to Israel, contact our office. Now they're twice a year, March and around about October, November, is the migration. Come and see it. We have facilities over there where we can take you along. Just let the office know, let us know. We've got some material on the table over there, and we'd love to host you in Israel. So Jerry, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry to make speeches, but that is it.
You should tell them about the barn owl and Yossi.
Okay. So the barn owl, Yossi realized that pesticides are very serious problems all over the world in agriculture. But what they have found is that barn owls are very good at getting rid of certain predators and pests. So what they've done is they've created these barn boxes and they've distributed them throughout Israel in the fields, etc. And in fact, the idea has also been taken abroad. So it's just a wonderful natural way, using nature and using the flora, the birds, in order to help us make the place a cleaner world. So I look forward to hearing from all of you, or some of you, but please, it's an open invitation. We'd really love to see you there.
Just
Hi,
to
tomorrow.
mention,
Are you organizing it? Is there an organized trip that is going to go to Israel for birding anytime soon?
They're actually in March, in Eilat, they have a birding festival. So if anybody wants to know about that, they can speak to us. Also, what we do at the end of the year in November, there's a mission, and we go to the various aspects of what the organization does. And that will include a day at the Hula Valley. In fact, when you were there in November, we were there as well. Avi and I went along to see what was going on. And we did go to one of the last, just before sunset. And what impressed me was when the birds started to come back to the ponds, it was like looking at the Second World War invasion of Europe, of the birds coming and flying, wave after wave. And they have counters. They counted 55,000 birds that afternoon. So I must tell you, it was probably one of the greatest experiences I've ever had. And please, I've said enough, but come along with us, and we have some material over there. Jerry, thank you. I didn't mean to jump in.
I did want to add, actually, with regards to the barn owls, Yossi Leshem speaks of migrating birds have no boundaries, and actually he's exported this idea of the barn owl both to the Palestinians in the territories, the West Bank, and to Jordan, where it's used. He gets along with everybody. Was there a last question before I cede the microphone? Joel Kurtz.
Okay, so if you had this map and you didn't have the flyway, you don't have the landmass, perhaps you could predict the flyway, because the birds seem to want to remain over landmass.
Yes. Yeah, birds do not like to fly over the water, and that's what they call a rift valley. So there's often updrafts of air to help them go forward. Tamar, that'll be the last question.
Why did they make us get up at 4:30 in the morning at the Hula Valley?
Why did they?
Why did they make us get up at 4:30 in the morning?
I hope that wasn't the SP and I that made it. I wouldn't. Oh, okay. Well, take it up at the table. There'll be somebody to share those. Somebody has can give me a priestly benediction.
Unaccustomed as I am to public speaking, I came in here and I said, I didn't know Jerry had so many friends. And Jerry took my line, of course. And not only that, but he named you. It was really very impressive. Growing up, the only birds I knew about were kachkas and hens, chickens and ducks, and they didn't migrate. A friend of mine, Alav Shalom, Michael Signer, who was once in Toronto, said that actually the Jewish bird was not the hopu, but the chicken, which graced the Shabbos table, and also what you did Shulchan Kapporos with. Those were the birds that we knew. What Jerry has done for us is broaden our horizons, no pun intended, to recognize that there is a real connection underneath it all, with birds, with birding, with migration, and with song. And for Jerry opening this up to us, we are very grateful and very much in your debt. Thank you, Jerry.
refreshments and information.